Welcome, everybody. Today we welcome Erin Sullivan presenting her Zoom meeting in Midlife, a meeting at the Crossroads, which is related to her book, The Astrology of Midlife and Aging. The meeting at the Crossroads is the encounter at the threshold of midlife we have with our own self. It is such a rich and full encounter with our unconscious life as it arises, demanding consciousness. There are no maps of this territory, with exception the horoscope. There are many emotional and psychological as well as circumstantial unseen realms to pioneer within oneself during this time. You can purchase Erin's book on Amazon.com, and also if you go to astrodeens.com, you can find numerous articles that Erin has authored about this topic and many others. Welcome, Erin. Please go ahead.
Okay, thank you very much. Right, so I don't see anything except I'm sorry about this, but I can only see my PowerPoint. I have am I not supposed to see anybody else?
That's correct. Yeah.
Oh, okay. But I will see somebody else at some point, right?
Only if somebody speaks up.
Oh, okay. Well, all right, because I like that. I liked that kind of interactive thing. You know, here's the thing about midlife and aging is that, we're probably my generation of the 60s, coming up of age in the 60s, came of age at a time when there was a very powerful women's liberation. I talked about this before we got on, that I never really felt in any way offended or inferior or in any way, about men. I mean, this was a very important revolution that had to take place in the consciousness of the feminine function. And so men also took part in it in their own way, but they didn't have the same revolution. And so their approach to midlife is a little different, than it is for a woman. And it's really kind of an interesting flashback for me to consider, that because I was involved in a business and work, in creative work, with rock and roll. I was an artist and rock and roll and light shows and so on. So everybody would have assumed that I wouldn't have any issue with, say, anti-feminism. But my daughters, who are now in midlife, when I tell them about the 60s, because they think it's, that was like really free and everything, I said it was one of the most sexist times in history. It was like extremely sexist because the women were running about with this, consciousness of being free. And then at the same time, men were really kind of taking advantage of it in a very unusual way, in the sense that meant that women were free for all sorts of things. And so it was a very, very strange awakening that I had in my midlife. And I'm actually going to use myself as an example toward the end, because it's pretty fascinating astrology. Okay, it's not just about me. But when we move into what's called the second half of life, the transitions offer a special kind of opportunity to break with the social conditioning that's carried us successfully thus far and forward. We need to do something really great and really different. And the two planets that are most consistently lively in a psychoactive fashion during the midlife transition are Saturn and Uranus. This is not to, leave out sort of, all of the other cycles like Mars and Jupiter and the Saturn. But Saturn and Uranus are really significant images and symbols and archetypes, because Saturn A1 embodies the positive agency of homeostasis. It urges us to stay the same. It automatically wants to correct any influence toward change and transformation or upheaval. You can probably, as I'm saying this, feel that happening within you, because it is we resist everything. I mean, we have since the day we were born. It's part of the human condition, is to immediately seize up and to go into homeostasis where everything stays the same. So Saturn's agency is thus to maintain an earthy, practical, even at the risk of calcification or depression, is to try and not go changing and be revolutionary. I mean, if Saturn isn't honored in life, which we have to do, and this will introduce you to, good respect and propitiation of Kronos. If Saturn isn't honored in life, then it can actually bring a sense of soulless conventionality and psychological and physical stuckness to bear upon the soul, and thus is the precursor to a depression. Now, we've got this contrary factor where Kronos, being the younger and also the son of Uranus, so Saturn Kronos is the son of Uranus Uranus, and Uranus is the planetary medium which impels us toward change and acts as the inner agency for experimentation and growth, evolution, and individuation, which means literally becoming increasingly more of who you are, to individuate, to be against division. So Uranus is our actually I call him the inner witness, watching from the upper ethers for opportunities to change habitual behaviors, disrupt the status quo, stir up any stagnant pool. Uranus is not honored, then the result is anxiety, manic behavior sometimes can erupt, just, sudden abrupt changes out of character. And what it is it's forcing, and Uranus that's what Uranus is. Rick Tarnas actually wrote this little pamphlet called Uranus the Awakener. I've always called it the alarm clock, because it rings long and loud, and you've got to hear it, because that's what Uranus, really needs to play a high-level role in individuating and articulating what midlife is about. And midlife, it doesn't happen at the same age for every one of us because of the movement and the eccentricity of the planet Uranus. Although it returns precisely every 84 years to its beginning start, it actually has a very odd eccentric orbit. And so therefore, in certain signs, Uranus actually will take place as an opposition to itself, move around halfway around your horoscope, and then oppose your own Uranus. And when that happens, it can happen sometime between 37 and 48 to 49, and that's a blip in the Uranian cycle. So, when I was in midlife, I would have Uranus in Gemini, and it's sort of interesting when you think in terms of Uranus moving more quickly through Gemini, and sort of dragging its heels during Taurus. But Uranus and Gemini people, we had our midlife at 37, exactly as we had Pluto squaring its natal self. So we had two massive dynamics going on, one of which was death of the old, and the other one was innovation of the new, and a kind of rebellion. People rebel against themselves. People even talk to themselves in their living rooms when in the middle of some kind of midlife decision. So it's extremely active, and it really is like becoming one. I should move ahead. So it's about change. Now, change or not to change. This is one thing that I think is really important to realize, is that we do change. We do change whether we like it or not. Now, here's the thing. I love this metamorphosis here, because this is instinctive change. The caterpillar has no idea when it's in the pupa stage that it's going to become just a caterpillar. I mean, this is the beauty of creatures, of animals, and the sort of more primeval creatures of the planet, is that they don't have existential anxiety. I mean, this pupa isn't freaking out because it's going to go into this cocoon bag and then start turning into something really weird and changing and growing legs and then trying to struggle and fight with the itself. It has no idea that it's going to actually become this beautiful thing, this sort of, this beautiful butterfly that everybody raves about. Nobody likes this part. Everybody's a bit creeped out about it, right? So we have to realize is that, that we too have these natural states of, insulating ourselves into a safe place where we might be able to undergo change. And the big urge with the psychic components of Saturn and Uranus, they're needed for wholeness. For innovation to become actually manifest, it requires the adamant sickle of old Kronos, the discipline of matter over mind. And the eidolon itself is simply the archetype of Uranus, while the idea takes the form with effort and adamant labor. I use the word adamant deliberately because adamant is a form of volcanic glass, and it was an adamant sickle given to Kronos in order to castrate his father Uranus and separate forever heaven and earth. So there'd always be this kind of need for a bridge between earth and heaven. People have tried to create religion, for instance, in our past 2,500 years, which has not worked out very well at all. In fact, I was speaking to somebody before the talk about where we are now. I mean, people experiencing, for example, their midlife opportunities and significant changes, as this Jungian quote says, do not have the same opportunities, for example, as I did. And I'm looking at my daughters, and I'm looking at their midlife, and they have teenagers and so on. And I'm just going, oh man, I have to really be okay with evolution because, the kids, my grandchildren, who are now like 17, 18, and 21, they are hardwired and they have receptors in their brain for things that I will never know. And so living with trust in midlife is very important. And my kids have even taken to reading the book. And I told them to skip over a lot of the astrology stuff. They didn't have to worry, but just read the philosophy. And that doesn't change. I mean, the advice whilst going through midlife does not change based upon a generational stamp. Okay, society evolves, and the individuals do with it. They are able to accept things that we find appalling. They're able to do technical things that I myself will suddenly discover, as if I was the discoverer. So when we get into the midlife threshold, we actually are arriving both at a threshold, but it's actually a crossroads, and at which stand two of the most important gods in transition, Hecate and Hermes. I want to start with my favorite, modern poet, David Whyte. And you might want to check out his website, Many Rivers Home. I saw him first at Royal Roads University in Victoria. I was gifted a ticket to attend the weekend workshop, and he opened I actually got him to sign my book and had a chat with him before because I'm Erin Sullivan, I'm Irish, and so is he. And, and then we talked a little bit about Whidbey Island because I used to live there. But the man is incredibly grounded. If he weren't living in the United States, he would be Poet Laureate of Ireland now that Seamus Heaney has died. But you don't have to be a poet to understand what he's saying in this. It's a good longish poem, but here it is. here we are at midlife. Start close in. Start close in. Don't take the second step or the third. Start with the first thing close in, the step you don't want to take. And I like this one because you see this, I've actually spent time in Arab countries, and I find the people of Arabia very interesting and fun and fascinating. And this actually says, this is a poem in Arabic. It's in Ottoman Arabic, very flamboyant and beautiful Arabic script. And what it says is, what need have I for this? What need have I for that? I am dancing at the feet of my Lord. All is bliss, all is bliss. Which leads us into the whole issue of past and future, which is a concept based upon observation of chronological time, which is, of course, chronos. And for each step, keep this in mind, just to picture this little crossroads here. Every time you move one step forward into the future, you leave that much history. So the more your future, the greater your history. And so it's very interesting to be in the middle, because it now doesn't actually exist. And I know that many, Sufis and, Khalil Gibran and so I'd say everybody, all the mystics say there is no such thing as now. Well, of course there isn't, because the minute I say now, it's not now, it's now, you see? So it can be a problem. So here's where you get to be in what I call liminality. Now, everybody knows how fond I am of words. Liminality comes from the most ancient word, would be from limn, from the Greek, which means the edge. It's like we have many forms of using the word liminality, about transitioning. So if you're in liminality, it means that you're not where you used to be, but you're not quite yet where you're about to become. And that can be seconds and it can be years. There's no quantification of time here, only quality of time. So what's happening with this particular diagram is it's about transition, crossroads, uncertainty, excitement, the urge to do something entirely different. And it develops from, this is making sure that we've got time for me to actually talk about things very briefly. There are developments that will return as memories, okay, in our psychic memory. And these developmental years, 2.2 years, is the first stage to individuation. It's when the kid says no. In fact, I have an article. Oh, I've got 2 articles out right now. One of them's in the Mountain Astrologer, and it's on this first 7 years of life. And in the AA Journal, and it's on, my goodness, I can't remember. Oh dear. See, I'm getting older. I'm now moving into my 70s, so I have a whole nother thing to deal with besides midlife. Right, so I'll tell you about it later. Anyway, so from 2.5 to 2 years, you have this desire to cut the boundary between the child and the parents. And so they usually have to do it in a pretty outrageous way. And so it's a matter of how you treat them or how you were treated, how you will be able to make a step forward. So your natal Mars has a place in this as well. What is your natal Mars about? Is it anxious to get forward? Is it excited by it? Or is it a little timid? I mean, there's just so many ways that Mars can be individuated. The first Jupiter return is when we start to identify with groups in a very tribalistic way. I mean, you'll notice, a lot of us have lived long enough to watch different costumes associated with tribes that teenagers have. And some of them are wonderful, and some of them are just like, oh God, I mean, they're really, the low hung pants were a bit awful, but then it's all changing. So we look for a tribe, And sometimes when we're in midlife, our tribal needs change, and our identification with groups gets a little kind of soft, and we begin to start looking. And sometimes we withdraw into Saturn, where we, at 15 and 16, towards that time frame, we're really testing our own authority versus social and family and external authority. Midlife is precisely what happens. As I say here in the notes, this is a real important time, 15 to 16, to set the sort of template for dealing with rebellion, rejection, and eventual adulthood, if we ever get there, at the Saturn return. So there is what I call midlessence in my book, Midlife. A second adolescence was when it happens at midlife. First Saturn return, the first adult emotional awareness of self and self-nurture. Family and tribe become important, and it's a preparation for 29.5, the first Saturn return, where we cross the threshold into new adulthood, feeling like we have some experience, where we become a person with a family, not the child of the family. There's always a struggle. There's always a struggle. This picture I've always liked, and I think I've used it in many other ones too. It's a photograph of, it comes right out of Hesiod, the 8th century BCE poet who wrote the Theogony, the sort of begats of the gods. And this is Uranus, reaching round Gaia, longing for love. And she created him because she was lonely and she wanted someone to be with her. And then when there's a story that is pretty grisly, but Uranus impregnated Gaia with monsters, and she loved them because every mother loves her child. I mean, it is what it is. But the father, Uranus, said, no, these are creepy. These are like, they've got 100 hands and 50 heads. We don't want these. So he suppresses them to Gaia. She then hires or convinces her eldest son, Kronos, to reach up, and it says in this book, it's a quote coming right out of my memory, as Uranus lay round Gaia, longing for love, his son Kronos reaches up with an adamant sickle given to him by his mother and castrates him. So maybe that's why Freud was so anxious about being castrated. And maybe that's why he took so much cocaine. Who knows? But this is what I think becoming one with the heavens is really about. It's like having a place in the sky, where you're ultimately free and not even connected to the earth. I mean, you can still exist in consciousness, but not always in the way that you used to. And so since the beginning of time, in mythic time, we really have to look at the heavens. I mean, every night I do, every day I do, from Earth, and observe with awe and wonder. It's like, it's just such an amazing thing. If you really just stand still for 5 minutes and say, what is going on? I mean, it's a great question because it's never answered. And as a Promethean urge, in other words, one where you want to, start something new and create a whole new life and, invent yourself again. This is where that comes from, is this looking up to the sky and saying, well, there's every possibility there for me. And so the planet Uranus has to do with, being able to transition and to change and to undergo transformation, to rebel, to go radically into opposite directions in order to test, because it leads us further and further along our radical, inquiring, revolutionary, inventive seeking, and thirsting souls and minds. He is a God, and we are all in this God. Okay, so the God is not necessarily within us. We might be within the God. And so when we're dealing with a Uranus opposition, and you can translate this into your levels of knowledge, into anything, a Uranus transit, we cross the boundary of the known and enter the realm of mystery. And he's a reminder that we are not alone. I don't know how to make that go away. Okay, because I can't see. I don't know. Okay. This is a really great picture. It's pretty nasty, eh? What you'd have to really look at it, but you'll see what we've got here is we have Kronos castrating Uranus. And there's the great heavenly spheres, right? And so there's all these like women on one side and men and women and children on the other. And there's this great riotous horror going on while the heavens are being rent asunder from the earth. And you know, in that midlife crossover, you know, because this is a very big force, is to absolutely and totally divorce ourselves from what we used to be and sort of wander the threshold to where what we're going to be. You know, we can fall victim to great tricksters, because the mind, as I put here, is a great trickster. And when we're in midlife, if we're trying to figure it out as opposed to feel our way through it, then we might find it more stressful. Okay, and it's always better to. I promise, I have never found a better way to look at the world and its life than astrology, and it is truly the most astounding thing. And there are several people who have found some really interesting stuff that I like and that makes a lot of sense. And so, you know, it just keeps going on. You know, I came out of the Rudyard school, and he was a bit of a friend, and his wife was a great friend. She was born on the same day as me, or his last wife. And his teaching was very important because it was all about evolution. Everything that Rudyard taught had to do with one thing. It leads to another, leads to another, leads to another. No one thing is isolated or separated of itself. So in your midlife, you will find yourself, A, isolated and separated, and B, one of a major, important mythic change that takes place. So, you know, the Pope is called the Pontifex Maximus. Okay, Pontifex Maximus means the big bridge, and the Pope is supposed to be the big bridge between heaven and earth, mortals and gods. However, I think that when we get into it, it's actually Saturn who is actually the bridge between the real life. I mean, there's many ways of looking at the real and the ideal. There's a lot of ideals that come up for us in midlife. All the things, and this is something that sometimes and most often, the midlife transition with Uranus opposite Uranus, and it doesn't have to be, give it a little wiggle room, yeah? And there's always a feeling that that you're missing something. There's something not quite as good as it could be. And if you are, it doesn't matter what, frankly, what your occupation or your intellectual front ramifications are, but everybody gets into this space where they really feel that they're not doing it right, and that's because Uranus is a perfectionist. He's a greedy, perfectionist who would not allow his hecaton Kyries to be born, stuff them into Gaia until she's like desperate, and finally, he has to be castrated away so that the babies can be born, and they come out and they're fine. They're just weird. But the father, of course, is not approving. Uranus looks down and sees imperfections. sees mistakes. Uranus is a perfectionist. Saturn is more earthy. Yeah, he's sort of more funky and more capable of actually allowing a certain level of madness to occur, but always stepping in at the last minute. And I like this picture here because it really, it just really made a lot of sense that we are, in fact, in a homeostatic state at all times. This is important. I mean, if you didn't have veins, why, with vein walls, then you'd be leaking blood all the time. If I didn't have skin, I'd just be this sort of pool on the floor. So Saturn rules containment. And so we have to be contained while we transform. And so in breaking free from the linked fence, our safety net, if you will, and letting go of our old, which doesn't mean forever, but just letting go of old patterns, and you have to find them yourself. An astrologer can suggest and help. Very much. I mean, it is our job to interpret the archetypal aspect of each body in the sky as it affects or plays a role. I shouldn't say things like affect, but that plays a role and is engaged in the drama of our own lives. And so Saturn, during midlife, is engaged in the drama of trying to kill his father, Uranus. We know what revolution is all about. All of us here have witnessed various kinds of revolutions, and we all are witnessing one of the most critical and possibly terminal problems that we've ever experienced as human beings on this planet. And so for people going through midlife right now, their midlife is not only fraught with internal changes and navel gazing, which I had plenty of time to do, but it's also fraught with the possibility that, the possibility arises in the psyche of most people who have a sense of consciousness and responsibility that we might be ending our world. So, I have a lot of clients who were born, in the 1960s, in the very middle of 1960s, during the Saturn-Uranus or Pluto-Uranus conjunction, opposed by Saturn. And so what were we doing as the revolutionaries? I'm born in 47. As the revolutionaries, what were we doing acting out our sort of post-adolescent, if you will, growth, and then heading into midlife after such an exciting background of overcoming and changing and lawmaking, and for instance, the Environmental Protection Act was 1972. We have to do all this over again? These kids that are out there now undergoing midlife, they're not making enough money in their jobs. They usually have some kids, teenagers. It's just their whole mindset is not geared to adventure to the way ours post-war and World War II minds were. We were actually, wired to revolt. Yeah, people with, Mars, Saturn, Pluto conjunct and that kind of thing. So when you see a picture like this, keep in mind that, look at Saturn, he's sitting happily, just nice and comfy, in the safe place, while Uranus is like winging it off. And, so try and keep control of the outrageous aspects of change, which when I go to my example, you'll say, well, how come you didn't do that? That's because I'm older. So Uranus is part of individuation. And this I'm going to do rather quickly because I want to go into further before our time. You know me. The sun is the perfect image of the self and the ego, okay? I introduce retrograde planets with this one. And the self, grows and it pokes holes in the ego. Yeah, it gets weak. And then you have to spring with a new ego container. You have to find a new way to say, I am. I mean, you've been saying, I am X, Y, and Z all this time, but, when your little seed self says, no, it's not good enough. You got to change. You got to grow. And pokes holes in the ego, makes it more porous, and it reforms. And so this is really important in just understanding what it means to be in a place where your deep self is telling you you have to change. And then we meet ourselves at the crossroads. And there are guardians at these crossroads, and they bring protection and guidance and awareness, and both archetypally and psychologically, and they're all associated with the outer planets. And you remember I did that talk on the outer planets as agents for options in consciousness. Well, Uranus and Neptune and Pluto are involved in the midlife, and you'll see in a minute how. Saturn and Mercury are always present as well. Hermes more as the psychopompus, the soul guide. And he's the only god who moves freely between the underworld and the upper air. I mean, he wings his way up and down. He takes the shades and, ushers them down into the depths of Hades. So he also acts as the one who ushers us down into the depths of our psyche, and thus winging away up into the higher heights of our mind. He is the son of Zeus and Maya, and he was a trickster. He is a trickster. And there's loads of tricksters in midlife. And but he's a very good friend of Hecate, and she is the one who guards the threshold to Hades. And we often go to Hades in our transition in our lives to experience the mysterium conjunctio. And what that is, it's a Latin term, but it's Jungian, okay? So it's the mysterious union that occurs in some kind of unconscious agreement. Then there's the opus oppositorum. And I use that term when I'm talking about Saturn transit and the heroic journey, because it's the work of turning into your other. But the opus oppositorum actually is related to the personal heroic journey, the report that I have, where it actually operates in a reverse order as it transits Saturn. Also, there are masses of synchronicities that occur during midlife that are absolutely numerous. They're natural occurrences, and I wish I could see what it says. Is there any way I can get rid of this? Oh, wait a minute. I think I know how. Duh. Okay, natural occurrences in non-causal ways that are numinous. Okay, people often wonder, well, what is a synchronicity? And people will have written volumes on it. I mean, Jung wrote volumes on it. Tarnas has written volumes on synchronicity and so on. Synchronicity is simply something that makes your hair stand on end. And there's something going on. And it's like, it could be some running into somebody at the grocery store at a particularly, erotic, if you will, birthing, gestating time. Oh, and this is a page right out of Midlife and Aging. And I'm going to make it really kind of quick because I want to make sure that I can look at this example. It says, at the opposition of transiting Uranus to your natal Uranus, it will begin to make the exact opposite aspects in the natal chart. Now, this is extremely important. It was something that I discovered. And that is that when we talk about living the unlived life, okay, when you were born, Uranus was in a particular space, okay? and I'm going to go forward because there's lots of stuff I could talk about. Okay, when you were born, Uranus was in a particular place, right? Okay, just leave it there. Okay, visualize or look at your chart, and then just run your finger from Uranus around the circle and transit form to where it would be at your opposite place, and notice that it makes a bunch of aspects all through that sort of 38 to 48 year transit. What is so amazing to me, because this is what happens to me when I start writing or I start thinking, is that I start to discover stuff that I didn't even realize that I was on a track of. And so what I realized was, for example, if transiting Uranus made a conjunction to your natal moon as its first transiting aspect after your birth, yeah, then Uranus will make an opposition to your natal moon at midlife as Uranus continues to transit the second half of your chart. In other words, you really are living the unlived life. Uranus makes exactly the opposite aspect to every single planet in your chart at, like, because it's gone from here to here. Okay, so if it's gone from here to here, it was making aspects to planets and the planets above, and it was making conjunctions and trines and all sorts of aspects. As soon as it hits the Uranus return, it begins the same process, only different and in reverse. So try it out. It's kind of interesting. So this crossroads I'm talking about, crossroads are sacred in all mythologies. In the Greek myths, there are many people or gods and goddesses who sort of hang around crossroads and, you know, wait for people to show up, or, you know, people in needing assistance to either cross it or not. And the most important ones would be, as I said, Hermes and Hecate and Persephone. And so we have Uranian gods, which is Aphrodite Urania, who was born out of the castration of Uranus by Kronos. When he reached up and castrated Kronos, not only did he split heaven from earth, he also birthed two of the most powerful entities in Greek mythology. One, Aphrodite Urania, the semen fell into the Cypriot Sea and quickened and uprose Aphrodite Urania, hence Botticelli's famous Venus on the half shell. The other interesting thing that a lot of people don't know is that the blood from the castration fell to the earth and up sprang the Furies. 3 of them. Now you'll notice in Greek mythology that most of these awful women come in triplicities. So it's not enough just to have one bad woman, you got to have a whole bunch of them doing it. I mean, and also, you know, I mean, Shakespeare, he also, you know, had the 3 witches, the bubble, toil, and trouble ladies. And so Aphrodite Urania, and she is about love at the ideal level. And this is something that often overwhelms us when we are in our midlife. And it has got a reputation, in a sense, that it used to be that I mean, the joke of midlife for people in the 1950s was that they would the women would go and take tennis lessons with a really handsome, you know, teacher and have an affair, or men would also do the same, but then they'd buy a red sports car because that's what the penile projection is. You get into a nice long shaped bullet and speed away, and so. You know, but these days it's not. It doesn't work anymore. That isn't what happens at midlife. I mean, it might happen, but it's not. You know, that's not the ultimate demand. That is not what's being demanded. People are more conscious now. Okay, I mean, certain levels of certain numbers of people are. And so the Neptunian guardian is the oceanic nereids, which are these shape-shifting female helpers riding the dolphins, who are Apollo's animal, to save you from drowning in fantasy and unreality. So they bring dreams. So in midlife, keep a journal of them. Longings, I had a most rich midlife, and we'll get to it. Longings and desires arise, illusions can be positive. They can also delay your growth. I mean, in my generation, there are more air guitarists than, actual musicians. I mean, it's just quite sad, really. And so you don't want to delay your growth by lounging about having fantasies. But if you have dreams, like a dream, you sit there and you have this dream, and you're like me. I have this dream now. I'm about writing this book, and it's going to be about Hades and his ladies, but it's not a fantasy. It's a dream. So I can actually make manifest a dream. But a fantasy is just kind of a nice thing to do for like half an hour to just like relax and just play. So I think it's a good idea, to kind of get on your knees on a fairly regular basis, or in a full lotus position, how it is that you pray. But it's very important during these times to actually get Saturnian, solid external helpers. The Plutonian helpers I've gone into in great depth. And he is always at the crossroads. And he's the only god who's allowed to go to Hades and back. Zeus went once. It was a bit of a disaster. Persephone appears as the loss of innocence. Now, there's an Icarus effect here, too, for men, in the sense that Icarus can fly too close to the sun and his wax wings will melt and he plunges into the sea. Now, this can be for a man. Okay, we could use Icarus. I should have put him in there. As a man's, something he has to face within. Persephone now helps a woman try and recognize that there is a sacred marriage between her feminine and her masculine character. Because Persephone, as the guardian of the shades, the daughter of a very powerful mother and the queen of the underworld, she has a tremendous control over the aspects of the anima and the animus. Hecate is a triple moon goddess. She's pretty gorgeous in most drawings because they like that. But, I don't think any of these women were really, they were pretty scary. I think they had to be because they were usurped. They were like overcome by the descent of the sky gods from the north, and thus forming the Greek origins of mythology that go back about 3,000 years now. Back to the about the end of the Babylonian period of time. And then there's Hecate. And she's the triple moon goddess. She's the prophetess of the future. She knows all the phases of our lives and the future. And she guards the threshold too. And she helps you, by, encouraging you to cross the threshold and to not do it. So you have 3 or 4 really good helpers at the threshold crossing. And really, people with Pluto and Leo, Virgo and Leo, Libra and Leo, and Scorpio and Leo have a midlife square, okay? Whereas all the other signs, they don't. Look at Pluto and Aries, Pluto and Taurus. I mean, Pluto doesn't make its first square, until 90 to 93. It's amazing. And then because of its incredibly 17-degree angle alignment with the ecliptic, doesn't behave. Pluto doesn't behave. Why should he? He's Hades. And then when we get it so we get it early. I think all of us talking, I think there's some Pluto and Sagittarius people here, and not Capricorn, but all of us who are talking, we all have Pluto square Pluto in our midlife period of time. And it's about dying. I mean, it is about letting go. It's a new factor, in fact, in the global anxiety that we now experience. Especially for us Pluto and Leo generations, we have both the shadow and the light. And so, Pluto and Leo, the puer and puella, the child archetype, there are, basically, and to be kind of facetious, but at the same time, 1/3 of them stayed the same. Another third of them ate all the American dollars and drank all the oil. And another third of them, just sort of moved off into the idealist world and the dreamers, yeah? Which brought beautiful music and loads of poetry and just fabulous stuff. So it was a pretty good time, the 60s and 70s. Okay, so this is also another table that's not particularly important for me to talk about now, but what it is that you cross the threshold and you have this second return of the lunar nodes, the Saturn trine Saturn, and Neptune square Neptune at 42. Now these are real. Well, it's 42 to 43. Actually, I had someone write to me very politely and say, I have Neptune squaring my Neptune, and I'm 43. And I'm going, oh my God, do I really have to deal with this? So I have to write her back, and I actually like these questions because then I get kind of into my writing mode. So I write a little article, if you will, saying, well, astrology is, thank God, not fixed in stone, and that we can't. It adapts to many things. So these major sort of moods, if you will, transitional forms: Saturn, a depression of the senses; melancholy, the ego container of the self dissolving, and a sense of being old and worn out, can actually happen. But you're not. You're actually at your prime. And that's where Uranus comes in, where you get the sudden split with who you used to be and who you're about to become. Disintegration. Loads of mood swings, radical ideas for change. You need for a new tribe or a new placement, position within your tribe, which is kind of Jupiterian. The anxiety and the alarm clock is about waking up. Neptune, I've often seen as like, with Neptune, take a big sleeping pill, and then Uranus is alarm clock, so it's going off, and so you're trying to sleep, but you got to wake up, and so Neptune is the sleeping pill, and Uranus is the alarm clock. And I think this is where using dream messages, really, if you can find a way of doing it, do it. Like, I'm not writing them down now, but I tell you, for 10 years, I kept a dream journal while I was in the training analysis in Jungian. And boy, your deep self is trying to grow your ego in appropriate ways. But there's always escapes, drugs and drink and sex and lots of it. There's tons of escape methods. So, just take care. Yeah, that's all. Just be aware. And we can't move forward and mature and grow if we don't go into the unseen one. Because we need to see the invisible. We need to be in love with the visible, with the invisible, and the mystery. And that's part of Pluto, is what drives us on. Like Neptune drives us on by, making us run. Saturn says, oh God, get depressed and, feel your sense of gravitas. But Pluto is about diving into the dark night of the soul and appropriating, a relationship, with ourself. And it's very important that we realize that all relationships that are formed in midlife are representative of yourself. This hieros gamos, the sacred marriage. And so that you'll find yourself seduced by all sorts of cool, dark, mysterious things. So they're not bad, but they are there. What's really funny is that, melancholy's got a bad reputation because, it often manifests as a clinical depression, and therefore people will take pills, and sometimes people really need it. I'm not absolute at all against certain important functions for modern medication. However, melancholia, this is beautiful. This was the first cover of Saturn in my book on Saturn in transit, the English version there. And so melancholy is the state of waiting for inspiration to strike, and not necessarily as a depressive affliction. In fact, it comes from the Greek melancholos, black bile and rage. Black is melan, cholos is rage. So midlife is an opportunity. And what Marsilio Ficino, the philosopher, astrologer, also very depressed guy, apparently, according to his own place, because he's always moaning about having Saturn rising when he was born. He wrote a book called Making Your Life Agree with the Heavens, and he calls Saturn the scholar's disease. And it's remedied by long walks in the woods, wearing white, worshipping Phoebus Apollo, and eating gold. Ficino transformed what had hitherto been regarded as the most calamitous of the four humors, black bile, into the mark of genius. Sun equals arum, gold equals plumbum, and Saturn is the dross that we want to turn into arum. It's an archetypal, it's an alchemical transformation that you're undergoing. That's when I first got introduced to alchemy as well. Here's a nice picture. It's just these 50 nereids and flowers and horses. Because he rules horses, waves, and he's also the god. He's the god of earthquakes. Uranus is not the god of earthquakes. It's with his trident that Neptune, Poseidon, strikes the earth, which causes an earthquake. And earthquakes, as we know, especially from the Banda Aceh one, that's one most famous in our current history, is that it creates an earthquake, which it creates this underground experience that causes tsunami. A tidal wave is totally different. So he can upset the status quo. And there's a shape-shifting factor with Poseidon. And on my website, I have a really good article on Neptune in Pisces. And I do recommend reading it because it's about being in liminality on the sea of change. And you'll get a lot out of that article, and it's on Neptune, and it's on my website. Okay, I'm going into Hecate. Oh yeah, I like this. Chthonic goddess, which means earthy goddess of the underworld, she guards the entrance to Hades and welcomes the shades. She has a bad reputation, as all women in myth do, and in real life too. So I think it's really important that we recognize that there is a place where we have to meet our opposite in order to be able to undergo a transition, a change. And so I was thinking there might be some of you, oh yeah, I love this photo. It's my very fave because there's Hermes ever at the ready. There's Demeter welcoming her daughter, who's become the queen of the underworld. And, Hermes is a son of Zeus and Maya. And again, we find that, we go into these dark underworld places for maturation. If you don't think seriously, then you don't really get to the place where you need to be in midlife. And you'll find that when you read it in the book or in the article on astrodates, it's really an exciting opportunity of turning our dross into gold, to becoming more and more of who we really are. Do you have any? I'm hearing a voice.
2 minutes. 2 minutes left. Thanks, Erin.
Oh, really? Oh, well, then I'll have to not do this. We may as well finish.
Okay, would you like to please click on stop share?
I would love it if I'd had a heads up. I would have made it quick.
Okay. So.
Well, thank you very much, everyone.
Oh, okay. Could you please click on stop share? It's the red.
Okay.
That's it. So we're back to the panel. So thank you very much, Erin. Thank you from all of us.
Oh, good. You're very, very welcome. I just enjoy working with you guys.
Yeah, Dawn.
I have a question, Erin. I wonder if you use precessed when you're a precessed return, or if you're precessionally corrected return when you're using the Uranus return, or any others. No, I guess not. Okay.
No, I use it when Uranus returns to its place in your natal chart. But then of course Uranus will only have progressed maybe 5 degrees in your life by secondary progression. So no, it's the opposite. It's the opposition of Uranus to Uranus. Thanks. Any other questions? Thank you.
Okay.
We'll see you next time.
Thank you so much. Thank you from all of us.
Thank you, Erin. That was really good. Are you going to join us for the community meeting, and we can talk about Uranus, Mercury?
Oh, really? Oh.
We have a next meeting coming up in 5 minutes. You're welcome to join.
You know, I just might do that. I don't have anything on this afternoon, so certainly, yeah.
Okay.
Interesting. Sure.
So
what do I do?
Wanda will send you the link. She'll email you the link.
Oh, okay. So it's all home.
Okay, just in about 5 minutes.
Okay, great. Well, I'll get my Google Mail up and I turn off my screen. Yeah.
Well, we're ending this meeting. You don't have to do anything. So.
It'll come up on this screen, will it?
Thanks, Erin.
Yes, the new meeting will come up on the screen when you click on the link. So that's in 5 minutes' time.
Okay, fine.
Okay.
Check your email, Erin. She's going to email it to you.
Yeah, exactly.